Hi, welcome to High Flight Financial. My name is Kirk Reagan, and I'm a certified financial planner, as well as a military qualified financial planner. And in today's video, I'm going to talk about that ultimate decision there of deciding whether you should retire as a lieutenant colonel with 20 years, or whether you should try and make colonel and hold it for an additional 3 years and retire as a colonel. So in today's discussion, I want to look at it in 4 different ways. First, from a value proposition of how much more money that you'd actually get in retirement pay, and then look at it from a total value of your pay perspective, and then look at total lifetime income, as well as opening it in financial planning software and seeing how the difference from a total lifespan perspective. And then overall, we're going to look at the pros and cons of each of these decisions. The first one is the value proposition. So you spent 20 years of your life accumulating pension credits that will pay you roughly $66,000 in a pension as of 2025, in the year that this video was made. That is roughly $3,300 for each year of service that you had over those 20 years. However, if you stay an additional 3 years and make colonel, that's going to bump that $66,000 to $88,000. So a difference of $22,000. Which is the equivalent of $7,333 per year of those additional 3 years of service. Therefore, if you just look at it as how much of your pension are you getting for each year, it's $3,300 for the first 20 years, and then $7,333 for the last 3 years. A huge jump up for those last 3 years of service. Roughly 2.22 times as much for those next 3 years. The next one I want to look at is from pension calculators. So here's a screenshot and some screen shares of some calculations done by ChatGPT.
Here's an example I generated using ChatGPT. So I asked it to calculate the present day value of 2 different pensions, one being age 43 and one being age 46. For both of these, I assumed that it was going to be a male. And if we look at the lieutenant colonel here, that's going to be 43 years old, a pension of $66,000. So the present value in today's dollars is going to be roughly $1.7 million. If he stays an extra 3 years, pins colonel and holds colonel for 3 years there, the pension is now going to start at age 46. It's going to be $88,400, and the present day value there is going to be roughly $2.1 to $2.2 million. So we can see there a large difference in those 2 different pensions. And if we take that into a calculator, that's going to be a difference of $486,510. And it only took him 3 years to get there. But if we divide that total increase in present day value over the span of 3 years, it's basically the equivalent of getting an additional $162,170 every year for those 3 years in order to be able to afford that higher level pension.
So as we can see from those calculations, it's roughly $487,000 more for those additional 3 years. If you divide that $487 by those 3 years, you have roughly $162,000 of extra income. That lieutenant colonel at retirement is going to now make $200,000. That is an assumption that we make, plus their retirement income of $66,000. So now they're going to be making $266,000 total, far above what they were making as lieutenant colonel. And that is what generally entices people to retire. However, if you look at it from a perspective of not only the increase in salary as a colonel, but also those increased pension benefits of that $162,000 a year. So if we look at it now, a colonel is making $204,000 a year as a colonel, plus an additional $162,000 in additional retirement benefits. Now they have a total salary of $366,000 a year, far above what a lieutenant colonel in a new civilian job is making. This next way I want to look at it is from a total lifetime income. Is when you look at it, generally the first thought is, I need to get to those airline salaries faster so that I can make more money at the top. And while that is true, you will have more years at that top income. There's a couple different benefits of waiting those 3 years that we'll talk about later. As you can see in this next slide, that first year, you're going to be in a probationary period if you want to be an airline pilot, and you're going to be making far less than that lieutenant colonel. Although that salary is quickly going to ramp up, and by year 3, when the colonel's now retiring and starting that probationary period, obviously the lieutenant colonel is going to be in a far better position for salary in that year. However, as the years go by, quickly that colonel catches up in seniority. And even though that there is a 3-year difference, they'll be relatively close relatively soon. And then the big difference happens at age 65, when suddenly that airline pilot pay goes away, and now all there is the pension. That $22,000 is going to be forever there from age 65 all the way to death.
Here's a direct comparison using a financial planning system called Right Capital. And here you've got the proposed plan and the current plan, but for this analysis, it's basically the same thing. I haven't changed anything. And if we go through exactly what this plan is, I tried to make it as simple as possible in order to have an exact apples to apples comparison between a lieutenant colonel and a colonel here for the planning purposes. So for retirement expenses, I looked at $10,500. For a lieutenant colonel's salary here, that's $135,420 at the time of this recording. And then if we did BAH and BAS, I just kind of did a round ballpark estimate here of $45,000, and I also did make that tax exempt income there. And then in the second career, so after they've retired, I assumed that they went and got a second job right away, earning a very respectable $200,000. And so that basically is just trying to push it more towards the favor of retiring early. So a lot of airline pilots, other careers where they do offer higher incomes on the outside. This is the kind of the direct comparison that I'm trying to make here. And then if we looked at the lieutenant colonel pension at this point, so after 20 years today, that would be roughly $66,000. And again, that would start right after he retires. Then here looking at the Roth 401k, so in both cases, I assume that they're maxing out the thrift savings plan. That's the $23,500 for the Roth portion of it. And then for pre-retirement living expenses, I assume that was the $6,500. So this is going to be $6,500 until they turn age 65. And then at age 65, I assume that they would be doing a little bit more travel and things like that. And so I did plus it up to $10,500. But I did that identically for both the lieutenant colonel option and the colonel option. So as you can see here, this is a very basic proposal. And obviously, if you are maxing out that Roth 401k, and that also assumes that these Roth contributions are also recurring in the future job. So you're still maxing out whatever 401k option or whatever option that you have available there, that $23,500. It's assuming that you continue to max that out for the rest of your career. And then retiring at age 65, this is saying that you'll have 100% probability of success. So doing well there. And then this assumes at the end of plan here that the median, after they do multiple iterations here, probably 1,000 different Monte Carlo simulations, but the median of all of those is $8,460. And so now we'll compare that here in a second to the Colonel plan. And now as we look at the Colonel plan, all of the same assumptions are being made. So retirement still at 10.5, the pre-retirement living expenses at $6,500. The colonel salary there, so this is actually as a lieutenant colonel making $135,000. This is the additional amount that they would make in those last 3 years as a colonel. So that promotion gets you a little bit more money there. So an increase in pay for those last 3 years. BAH and BAS still roughly the same. And then the second career, again, it's now starting 3 years later, but initial payment there of $200,000. And then the colonel's pension there, income of $88,000 instead of the $66,000 that you would get for a lieutenant colonel. So we're still looking at 100% success. We're still looking at maxing out that thrift savings plan Roth and the Roth 401k. So again, you're still going to get that 100% probability of success. But now you're looking at $9,017,912. And if we look at that from a math perspective, we're looking at roughly 9 million and then 17,000 versus 8,460,000. You're looking at an increase of about 6.5% there. So again, this is the colonel exceeding the lieutenant colonel options. Even though the lieutenant colonel starts that higher paying salary earlier, the colonel salary at the end of the plan, so at the end of his life, would still finish out 6.5% higher.
So what are the pros and cons of each of these decisions? So I'm going to look at it from the perspective of staying in to make colonel. So the first and obvious one is the guaranteed higher pension income. The other big plus is going to be your survivor benefit plan. That survivor benefit plan to your spouse is going to be 55% of that pension income. So if you retire at 20 years and suddenly something happens, your spouse will only receive 55% of 66,000 instead of 55% of 88,000, a much higher payout for the rest of their life. So from a protection standpoint, it is definitely a pro to stay in. From those who like to maximize their VA disability, it's also 3 years at an advanced age where who knows what could happen medically, and all those things are recounting towards your VA disability. There's also some prestige that goes along with being a colonel, as well as possibly higher paying follow-on jobs. If you decide not to be an airline, there may be some more advanced jobs that might be available based on your higher rank. And lastly, it also delays that probationary period. If you're going to be an airline pilot, that probationary period is pretty low pay at the very beginning. But now you're delaying it 3 years. So not only are you delaying it 3 years in order to allow you to accumulate more assets and possibly a taxable account, but it also increases that pension amount. When you get that probationary salary, now you have a higher pension amount to offset that, to put you in a better position to take care of your family. Now, from a cons perspective, obviously these are pretty simple at the very beginning. It is most likely going to entail at least one PCS, maybe even 2. You're also at risk for another deployment. As I can attest to, I had to do a 365-day deployment in order to stay and make colonel. It also delays the ability to start building seniority at your future job. For the airlines, that's critical. So if you have younger children, gaining that seniority earlier in your career and earlier in their ages allows you to have more flexibility possibly when they're in their high school years and there's more activities that you need to attend. There's obviously 3 more years of computer-based training and PT tests. Can't avoid that. The other thing for those of you that know that you're going to get a relatively high VA disability pay, it's also going to delay receiving that VA disability pay. So these are some of the pros and cons that I've discussed, but every person is different. You have a unique situation, and I'd love to discuss your situation and see if I can't come up with the optimum decision for you.
The information provided in this video is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute financial, investment, tax, or legal advice. I am not your financial advisor, and you should always consult with a qualified professional before making any financial decisions. All investments involve risks, including the potential for loss of principal. Past performance is not indicative of any future results. This video does not endorse any specific investment or strategy. By watching this video, you agree that I am not responsible for any financial outcomes based on the information provided.